Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending an early lunch with us learning about cybersecurity. Going to give this a couple moments while everyone filters in before I start my spiel. We are very lucky today to be joined by David Cruz and Lauren Reed of Arctic Wolf. We are going to be talking about cyber risk and a really interesting cyber program that you can use as a client of Hausmann Group. I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items before we get started here. One, that this webinar is recorded, so don't worry if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you are watching this as the recording, or if you're joining us for the whole time live and you want to share it with someone else. You will get a link to the recording as well as a copy of the presentation slides. Also, we are using the Zoom platform, which means that you can ask a question at any time during the webinar, and David or Lauren will address it. We are going to save that for the end. We've got about 15 minutes that we've grouped off. So if you've got a question or just want to say something to the speakers, you are welcome to do so. With that, I am going to introduce you to Mr. David Cruz. He is the Director of Insurance Alliances at Arctic Wolf, the leader in security operations and incident response. At Arctic Wolf, David works with cyber insurance carriers and brokers to deliver services and tools that help businesses of all sizes and industries reduce the frequency and severity of cyber attacks and, should one occur, respond to them with full service incident response programs. Prior to his role, David was actually a cyber practice leader here at Hausmann Group, where he advised us and our clients on how to align their cybersecurity practices with cyber insurance to achieve better risk transfer results. Thanks so much for being here, David. And thank you again, Lauren, for being here as well.
You bet, you bet. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, Cassie, and for everyone that's joining us. It's good to see some familiar faces in the participants list here. I see some old colleagues of mine. I see some folks that when you first got your cyber insurance policy, I helped you write the things back in the day. So it's fun to have these sort of full circle moments in life, and this is one of them here. So we are in the midst of a webinar, just mega day here between Arctic Wolf and Hausmann Group here. We started off the morning focusing on manufacturing risk and the security issues unique to manufacturers. We moved then into the Hausmann Group's small business space. So, their select commercial team is what they call it. So think more like sole proprietors, shops with maybe 5 to 10 employees, things like that. Now we're moving into the real estate and hospitality focused group at Hausmann Group. And that's, I know, one of their bigger practices. And from an insurance risk standpoint, the more real estate you got, the more risk you have too. One of the comparisons we'll be drawing today is essentially the digital twin that your company has built, because that's what we've all done over the past couple of years. We've sort of stood up these organizations in the, online web applications or, servers in our offices, things like that. And we have essentially a digital equivalent and a digital list of properties that we manage as well. So we're going to talk about what the risk profile looks like for those. We're going to talk about how you can reduce the frequency and severity of the risks that face that risk profile. And then lastly, we're going to dive deep into what this partnership looks like between Arctic Wolf and the Hausmann Group, and how we can enable you to actually take some meaningful steps to reduce the frequency and severity there. So before we get too far into it, Lauren, why don't you introduce yourself? We'll be kind of popcorn in this presentation here today. So let us know who you are, what you do.
Yeah, I'm Lauren Reed. It's great to be here. I'm Senior Director of Insurance Channel Marketing for Arctic Wolf. I've been with the incident response team since the very beginning and have been along the course of our progress with building out the program that we're going to walk through today. And I'm excited to kind of talk about more of the threat landscape as well to help organizations protect themselves. So great to be here.
All right, sounds good. All right. So before we get going here, I think it's good to sort of level set on who Arctic Wolf is. You probably have heard the name a little bit with some of the communications that Hausmann has sent out when we launched the partnership last month and some follow-up emails that have gone out. So you might be familiar with the name, but I'll give you the dime store tour of who we are as a company, and that'll hopefully help explain sort of the perspective with which we are speaking today. So Arctic Wolf, as a security operations company, is focused on two primary areas of cybersecurity. In the cybersecurity world, we call it left of boom and right of boom. Boom being the bad thing that happens, like the hack, the cyber attack. So Left of Boom, what we do on that side is focus on things like 24/7 network monitoring, security awareness training and managed phishing simulations, vulnerability prioritization. And we won't go into what all that means, but a substantial part of our business is that left of Boom. So working with companies ahead of time to make sure they don't fall victim to an attack. And that's sort of the context that we're talking in today too. We're hoping to arm you with tools so that you don't fall victim to one of those attacks. But the other part of our business is right of Boom, so after the bad thing happens. And that's the core team that Lauren and I work on, is how responding to cybersecurity incidences after they happen. So primarily what that looks like for us is partnering with cyber insurance carriers. We currently have preferred vendor relationships with about 33 different insurance carriers, the likes of Travelers and Beasley and Chubb and Hartford and so on down the line. So the carriers who have the policies that you probably have right now. So what that means for us is that when one of their policyholders has a claim, they file the claim with the insurance company, and the insurance company brings us in to launch the incident response effort on the behalf of that client and with the client themselves. So really the perspective we're bringing from this is both that pre-incident perspective and the post-incident perspective here. So I thought that was just good to level set who we are, what we do, so that you understand the perspective with which we're talking today. So really what that leads us to is a discussion on what is the state of cybersecurity for real estate and hospitality companies in 2023. That's the focus group that we're working with here. I see Alex Bauer on the call, and that's been your game for a decade, man. You know what you're doing here. So what is the state of cybersecurity for those organizations here? Really, when we look over the course of the past 10 years or so, the average frequency of cyber claims has gone up pretty dramatically over that time. So what we're not talking about here is an increase in just the raw number of attacks. That number would be high as well. But when we're talking about claims frequency, we're talking about the number of claims as a percentage of the number of total policies issued. Of course, the number of claims has gone up because there's just more cyber insurance policies, and you need to have a policy in force to file a claim. But as a percentage of policies issued, the number of claims has gone up about 562% over the past 10 years. That we reached our all-time high in November of 2021 in terms of ransomware attacks observed and responded to. And that was November of 2020, we hit that high watermark. And actually in April of 2023, so just a month and a half ago, we surpassed that November 2021 high. So this is a timely discussion. We just recently passed the highest watermark we had for attack frequency. So it's good that we're talking here today. And I just want to take a step back here. Being in the incident response world, we're to a degree, we're kind of like the paramedics of the cybersecurity world. And what that means is the stories that we tell, we're not trying to inspire fear and uncertainty and doubt or anything like that. That's not the point. But truth be told, you probably haven't actually ever talked to a cybersecurity incident response professional. You don't really want to be on a first name basis with them. That usually means that you're not having a good day. So I just want you to keep that context in mind, is that we're trying to just share the stories from the front lines so that you can better prepare yourself and better be situated to withstand one of these attacks. So if we look at what this looks like on an industry by industry basis, as we're looking at this chart right here, if you're in hospitality, if you're in real estate, the areas that I want you to focus on here, and let me get my Zoom annotate button out here. What I want you to look at are specifically these three categories right here. So because we're dealing with sort of two industry groups, but Hausman has one practice group that focuses on both, really we're looking at these particular bands right here in terms of the most frequently targeted industries here. So even though these seem like they're on sort of the lower edge of attack frequency, you look at the difference here and it's really not that much. We're talking about, close to 8% here versus the most frequently targeted industry is just 14%. So what we can take away from this particular chart is that threat actors aren't necessarily focused on any given industry. They're focused on targets of opportunity. And that kind of plays into how threat actors, in the business we call hackers threat actors. How threat actors find their targets is they'll just scan entire segments of the internet looking for vulnerabilities that they know how to exploit. They will exploit those vulnerabilities, and they often don't know who they've hacked until after they've hacked them. which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, but it's true. They will exploit the vulnerability, and then like a prairie dog popping their head out of the ground, they'll go, hey, where am I now? Holy cow, I'm in an Equifax or something like that. That's sort of how these attacks roll out. So even though it seems like there's this big disparity between, say, healthcare and down here in technology, truly they're just targets of opportunity. And that's generally how threat actors try and find their targets. If we're looking at the types of, let me clear that. If we're looking at the types of businesses that we're working with in terms of revenue and employee count, it's worth drawing some insights from those too. So there's a tendency amongst businesses to think that big cybersecurity attacks are more of an enterprise problem and less so an SME problem. So a middle market, up to $1 billion in revenue and below. There's often a tendency to say, well, hey, that's kind of a big kid problem, not an us problem. If we look at the median revenue and employee count of the victims that we worked with over the past year, we're not seeing mega businesses here. The median is, 80 employees, 50 employees, 122 employees, revenues that are probably, consistent with some of the folks on the call right here. Sure, we definitely worked some bigger cases with, this one here was 15,000 employees, 30 billion in revenue. That happens. But truly, a lot of these are just the businesses that make up the fabric of cities like Madison and Milwaukee and the Twin Cities and Eau Claire and Stevens Point and on and on and on. These are just everyday businesses. They're not these enterprises. So it's just worth noting that this isn't something that's an enterprise problem. This isn't a problem for any one industry or any one sized company. If you have technology and you use the internet, this is our problem to deal with together. So that's the frequency with which we're seeing these incidences. It's worth looking at the severity of the incidences that we're seeing too. So this data comes to us from a group called Net Diligence. You can think of them as sort of a trade association for the cyber insurance ecosystem, but also they're sort of a cyber claims data aggregator. And every year they release what's called the Net Diligence Cyber Claims Study, where they actually ask insurance carriers, what was your average claims payout per claim for a cybersecurity incident here? Over the past 4 years, we've seen that number double from around 90,000 to about 200,000 in cost. And remember, that's average. So that means 50% are higher, 50% are lower, essentially. So the biggest reason for this is the shift in how ransomware threat actors have operated over the past 4 or 5 years. When I was at Houseman, when I was writing insurance policies in 2017 and 18, and 19, your average ransom payment was probably around $5,000, $3,000. A big one might be $15,000 or $20,000. Those are all pretty manageable numbers from an insurance claims perspective. What happened over the past few years is that the ransom demands specifically have just ballooned from maybe $5,000 to $10,000 to $250,000, $500,000, these bigger amounts. The biggest single ransom that our firm paid last year on behalf of a client was $3.8 million. So these aren't by no stretch are these, trivial claims anymore. And you might have been able to say they were a trivial claim back in 2018, but that's just not the reality anymore. And one of the big drivers for that, one of the reasons that they've been able to demand higher amounts is, again, we've built these digital twins of our companies online. We've moved more and more of our core office functions, whether it's human resources, whether it's payroll, whether it's sales and pipeline management, whether it's accounting, whatever it is, we've moved those to these online environments, which means that more and more of our business and the more and more of sort of the soft, chewy center of our company is exploitable to threat actors now in a way that 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't, frankly. So you add all that together, and that ultimately means these threat actors have a little bit more leverage in some of these instances to demand higher ransom payments. That's what's good to focus on here. If we're looking at sort of our core industries for today's discussion, if we're looking at this construction, this other, and this retail here, that's really, those are the groups that are most tracking with the folks in the meeting today. So when you actually have an incident response effort, there's sort of 4 types of costs that a firm like ours would likely have you incur. The first is going to be the cost to actually contain the incident. That means figuring out where the hacker is and kicking them out, because you don't really want to mount your incident response effort until you've kicked the bad guy out of the system. The next is the cost to investigate that attack and find out how the bad guy got in, where they went when they were inside, what data they might have stolen from your environment, and basically how they did what they did. The next piece of what you're going to want to look at is the median or the cost of the negotiation. So if there actually is a ransom payment that needs to be made, how much, you're not going to want to pay the full value that they're demanding. You're going to want to negotiate that down. And that's something that any firm like ours or like us would do. And then lastly, there'd be some cost to recover your systems and actually rebuild them after the attacks happen. So again, when we look at incident severity, this is just one element of that, element of your total claims cost here. So this is one part of it. Your business interruption loss would be part of this, the actual ransom payment, your legal fees, so on and so on down the line. All of that affects your incident severity. So when we look at all that in total here, what we have is higher claims frequency. The data supports that. We have higher claims severity, the data supporting that. And if there's anything we know about insurance carriers, it's that they kind of live and breathe on big data. And they ingest that data, they make sense of it, and they essentially say, hey, we need a more demanding insurability process to counteract the frequency and severity that they're seeing here. So that's really the state that everybody finds themselves in right now. We got higher frequency, higher severity, and a more demanding insurability process here. Lauren, tell us a little bit about how we can push back on some of those trends.
Yeah, I think we'll dive into kind of the tactics of which we're going to reduce frequency, severity, and improve insurability. I think a lot of the information that's driven, or a lot of the information that's included in those resources are driven by the data points that our team collects on a regular basis. So what we're looking at here is a key kind of stat or kind of data point for the incidents that we respond to, known as root point of compromise. So that is the system or the activity that led to the initial compromise of the victim organization's environment. So you'll see here that over the course of the last calendar year in 2022, about 72% of the incidents that Arctic Wolf responded to were caused by external exposure. What we mean by that is with a lot of different tools, as David's mentioned with this kind of digital twin, there are a lot of tools that are externally facing out on the internet. Threat actors, as we've mentioned, are really pushing to discover kind of their latest window of opportunity. So oftentimes what we see is they find a vulnerability in an external system, maybe like a point of sale system, a particular server that your company is using, a firewall. They find those vulnerabilities and then they leverage that vulnerability to compromise systems. One bright side component of most of the incidents being caused by external exposure is that they've pretty much all of those vulnerabilities that are being exploited have issued security patches and updates to eliminate that risk or to remedy kind of that open gap that threat actors are taking advantage of. So what David will walk through here and a little bit with the program is how we can kind of cut through and distill all of the noise of all of the vulnerabilities and risks that are out there from a cybersecurity perspective. Because as general folks out there in the world, we see the headlines, we see the scary news stories about different incidents happening. What we've looked at is what vulnerabilities and what activities are leading to the actual incidents. And so we can kind of cut through the noise a little bit and give more of a clear picture with the external exposure risk. We have just kind of a trend comment in the first kind of quarter of 2023. We have noticed that the user action piece has increased. This is likely due to some kind of elevated sophistication with some of the phishing and social engineering campaigns that threat actors are using. We've noticed that some threat actors are using AI more often in their phishing attempts. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out and if the level of sophistication continues to rise and if we see more and more folks kind of clicking or entering passwords into systems where they shouldn't. So we have seen an uptick on the user action, but the key kind of bright side takeaway is that 72% were caused by external exposures that could have been remediated if proper patching and updating practices were in place. So if we look at it by industry, this is the breakdown of where that happened. So honing in on the few categories that your organizations would roll up into based on our kind of IR data, with other and retail, and especially construction, you can see that those software exploits are really the leading cause for the incidents that those organizations have experienced. So that could be a reservation system, point of sale, some type of piece of software that your organization uses to do business every day. They're always scanning to figure out what they can kind of jump in between or, compromise, so to speak. So it's those software vulnerabilities that are leading to a lot of the incidents. And then you can see the breakdown thereafter, moving all the way over through the different user action attack vectors that we see. If we look to the next slide here, David. So one of the components, in addition to kind of being able to cut through the noise and understand the vulnerabilities that are really leading to, cyber insurance claims or these catastrophic incidents where a firm like Arctic Wolf is brought in to remediate. Another huge component that we can use to our advantage is going through for organizations to go through the practice of building an IR plan. What we're showing here is that there is a significant difference in the overall incident cost if an organization has an IR team and an IR plan in place versus not. Blue is looking much more favorable for organizations in this chart than the orange. And again, it just accentuates the fact that when we don't have those proper planning steps in place, it can just lead to a lot more time spent and a lot more expense to remediate. One thing that I'll call out with the IR plan process is that an IR plan probably won't solve for every possible scenario or every possible question that will arise during an incident, but going through the IR planning process is still incredibly valuable just to kind of familiarize yourself with the different components that'll be kind of first and foremost throughout the incident response process. So certainly a worthwhile exercise, if for nothing else, for your team to get a better lay of the land of how your organization is configured from a technical perspective. But it just helps familiarize yourself so that when you're faced with those huge decisions or, time sensitive decisions when it comes to restoring your business, a lot of that has already been contemplated and discussed amongst your team so that you're more informed to make that decision if the time comes.
Mm-hmm. The one analogy that I like to use here, Lauren, is, any of us that played any kind of sport in, grade school or high school or collegiate, if there's some particularly skillful athletes on the call here, no matter what sport you play, a coach is going to talk about having a ready stance. So if you're in football, if you're in basketball or volleyball or whatever, you never just stand there kind of arms at your side, looking around going, wonder what's going to happen to me today. You're starting with your knees bent, your muscles are a little tense, your back's tight, and you're ready to go. Not to brag here, but I was starting center for my 7th grade St. Joe's basketball team. So I think I know a little thing or two about this, Lauren, but no. But
we'll let you have that, David.
But yeah, really the incident response team is by going through the effort to put that together, identifying the team and identifying the components of your plan, that is your business's ready stance for something like an attack like this. So even if you do get hit with something, you're starting from a place of resilience, not a place of, being back on your heels, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right. So if our goal is to reduce frequent cyber claims and reduce severe cyber claims and equip you for a demanding insurability process, we need to enable that in some way. And really that is the core of the partnership that we've got in place with the Hausman Group here. So the way that we're going to do that is with the tool that we've built called Cyber Jumpstart. And Cyber Jumpstart does 3 core things. We're going to help you reduce incident frequency, help you reduce incident severity, and improve insurability by giving you access to a tool that's going to help you build a custom incident response plan. So if we know that having an incident response plan in a team can reduce total incident cost by as much as 45%, well, then we're going to help you build the dang thing. So by having an incident response plan, again, we're going to aim at reducing those business interruption losses and really help enable some higher value risk management activities. One example is something like a tabletop exercise. You might have done these in other aspects of incident response or disaster recovery planning in your business, but a tabletop is essentially where you get all of the people that are, your core incident response team together, you get them into a room and you start throwing scenarios at your plan and you see how your plan responds to those scenarios. So that's a really great way to figure out what decisions are going to be made during this. How am I going to feel about those decisions? There's different ways to approach that, but you can't do a higher value risk management activity like that unless you have an incident response plan built in the first place. So we're going to help you build that. The second thing that we're going to do is help get IT professionals off the ground with cybersecurity projects. There's often a bit of a misunderstanding amongst executive ranks that IT and cybersecurity are kind of, they're really overlapping. They're pretty much the same thing. The truth is they're not. IT professionals are often tasked with cybersecurity jobs and things that they need to do, but really cybersecurity is almost an audit function of IT. So there's often IT professionals don't necessarily know where to start when it comes to launching a cybersecurity project. So we want to help get them out the gate. IT professionals are very good at following a strict set of procedures to put something in place, but they just don't know, okay, where do I start on something like this? So if you're applying for insurance and you've got either controls that you don't have, or maybe you've got a subjectivity on a quote that says you need to have such and such control in place, you'll be able to refer to these project guides to get it off the ground and be connected with resources that can help you implement those controls. The last piece that we'll focus on, and really the last core component of Cyber Jumpstart, is the ability to identify the most frequent vulnerabilities that lead to threats. So if our goal is to reduce frequency, let's give the ability to identify the most frequent threats. That's what we've done with the Jumpstart Threat Scanner. Those most frequent threats are also the most common disqualifiers for insurance. Insurance carriers aren't dumb. They know what vulnerabilities lead to the most claims that they have filed with their policies. So we want to give the ability to identify frequent claims causing vulnerabilities that are also immediate disqualifiers for coverage here. So I'm going to hop and just share what this platform actually looks like. While we're doing that, Cassie is going to actually share the link to this page, and we're going to get off to the races here. All right. So the link that, or actually, you know what, I think, Cassie, I think I might have sent you, might have forgot to send you that link. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right here, and away we go. So what I'll have you do is, if you just want to follow along, click the link that I just shared with you, and you can just follow along as we work through this here. So the first thing that you're going to do is navigate to this page. It's got our logo, Houseman's on it, so that's how you know you're in the right place. The first thing you're going to do is just sign up for Cyber Jumpstart if you haven't done that already. So your first name, your last name, business email address, things like that. Once you hit sign up at the bottom here, you'll be prompted to create a username and a password and enable multi-factor authentication for access to this portal. We wouldn't be a good cybersecurity company if we didn't enforce multi-factor authentication, but it's a quick setup. You'll probably be set up in about 2 or 3 minutes, so it should go relatively smoothly. Once you've actually navigated to this Cyber Jumpstart portal, this is what it's going to look like right here. Those 3 modules that we just talked about, the response planner, the threat scanner, and the guides, those all live right here. So Lauren, kind of walk us through the incident response planning module here.
Yeah, so when we developed the IR planner, it was really done so through the intelligence and threat kind of landscape trends that we've noticed through our incident response team. So we really worked with the incident responders, the folks that are helping organizations recover from these incidents day in and day out, to really understand where some of maybe the roadblocks are that they run into that may slow response down overall. We wanted to solve for all of that pre-incident, so that if it does come time to respond to one of those full catastrophic ransomware attacks, business email compromise, what have you, that we have all of that information documented, which allows our team to then work as quickly as we possibly can. So with the IR planner, you'll see that it's broken out into 5 main sections. The first 2 here are focused on the who's who. So the section that we've got pulled up here focus on the people within your organization. So the different decision makers and owners of the different groups, such as kind of the technical lead, financial lead, overall executive response leader. It's the folks on your team that need to be around that table, tracking contact information, both corporate communication methods, as well as some secondary methods in case business accounts are compromised, of course, to make sure that we can still keep that stream of communication open. The second section focuses more on external providers. So if your organization enlists services of any type of external IT provider, you'll see Arctic Wolf listed. In the event that you do experience an incident, we can certainly serve as that incident response provider. You'll notice the documentation of the cyber insurance information as well, to make sure that you're logging information about your agent with Houseman Group, as well as the process in which to submit a claim. The last line item in the middle there is Data Privacy Council. So Often you wouldn't engage Data Privacy Council prior to an incident, but they are a very integral piece to that claims process. They serve as an excellent advisor to organizations as they experience these cyber incidents to really discuss any type of data or regulatory obligations that they may have based on the findings that our team uncover with our digital forensics investigation. So again, the second section is to kind of figure out all of the external parties that need to be around the table when we're making different decisions throughout the incident response engagement. The latter three sections here are really focused on the technical environment and all of the different tools, systems, how they're all wired together within your organization. Prior to the incident response planner existing, an observation that our incident response team had was that oftentimes with these victim organizations, we may ask questions about how is your network segmented, or how do your retail locations communicate with HQ from a technical perspective. And there would oftentimes be some crickets on the calls when we ask those questions. Obviously, from an incident response perspective, it's critical for us to have that lay of the land and understanding of how things are connected, especially when it comes to eradicating the threat. That way we know that we can bring systems back online safely if we have that understanding. So this is where physical locations, data center locations, different tools that you use on the infrastructure side are all logged. In the incident escalation components, that's where we talk about some of the tooling that you have in place to identify incidents, as well as more of the communication processes and best practices amongst your team to escalate those incidents if they see something. The phrase that we use at Arctic Wolf is see something, say something, even if it's kind of like a weird eyebrow furl when you see a certain pop-up happen or an email come through, making sure that you're documenting the process that your team members are expected to follow if they do notice anything suspicious. The last section here is really kind of what I consider the meat and potatoes. So similar to having experienced victim organizations with some ambiguity with how their networks are configured or how their infrastructure is set up, the critical business functions are often a hot topic of conversation. So an example being if a hotel falls victim to ransomware, the internal stakeholders at play may view different business functions as more critical than others. So booking net new reservations might be the highest priority versus processing payments for folks that are checking out that day, maybe a critical business function for somebody else on your team. So working through and documenting those critical business functions, the details of those business functions, as well as all of the tools that kind of make those systems go, documenting that and having that healthy debate of what's deemed most critical pre-incident is certainly very valuable when it comes to developing the incident response strategy overall, and really helps to speed the process along overall as well. So those are the 5 main sections of the IR planner. When you click finish here, you'll notice the darker text down below to download an actual PDF file. We recommend securing a physical version of the IR plan. You'll notice the timestamp there under the title of the doc. That's the reason why we have that present, is because with the IR planner, it's meant to be kind of a living, breathing document. Things change all the time via whether it's personnel, a system that we use, or a process that we expect employees to follow. The idea with the IR plan builder within Cyber Jumpstart is that it can be updated in real time. So by having that timestamp, you know that you have the most recent information. It pulls whatever's entered in the tool at any given time when that export is completed. Anything that I missed on the IR planner, David?
Nope, I think it's almost like you've been doing this for a while.
Well,
No, that was fabulous. So yeah, so that's your ready posture for the organization here. So that by having that, you can reduce the severity aspect. So let's move back to the frequency aspect here. So there, we'll start with this. So assume that we've got assume you're a business with multiple physical locations, whether that's maybe multiple restaurants that you operate, multiple locations where you've got hotels, or if you're a commercial real estate firm, just different, offices or apartment buildings that you might own, whatever those are. Most of the firms on the call here probably have a property schedule on their property insurance policy, and that lets the insurance company know, okay, here are all the businesses here are all the physical buildings and locations that I want included on this policy. what a lot of us don't realize is that we essentially have a digital property schedule as well. No insurance carriers are really asking for that yet. My prediction is that they will start asking for it at some point, but no insurance companies are asking for your digital property schedule yet. But we all have one, or every business has one. And what that actually looks like is the websites that you are currently responsible for maintaining and all of the IP addresses that fall underneath your company's network. An IP address is just a series of numbers that ties to a specific computer. So everybody on a laptop or a mobile device that's watching today, every one of those devices has an IP address. Every server we have has an IP address. Every computer we have essentially has an IP address. So you add in all the websites that you're responsible for maintaining, and you add in all of your IP addresses, and that's essentially your digital property schedule. And that's what you need to document in the scanning tool for us to make sure that we're actually scanning all of your digital properties for vulnerabilities. If we don't know about a digital property, we don't scan for it, we can't identify vulnerability there. So what's important to know here is that for a risk manager, you probably wouldn't have access to all this data, but keeping a running list of your websites and your IP addresses, that's basically 101 level stuff for an IT professional. They'll be able to provide this without much hesitation, frankly. So once somebody on your IT team has actually entered in all of your digital properties, what we then do is we scan those properties for the most imminent threats that we see. And when we say imminent threat here at Arctic Wolf, what that means is a vulnerability that you can discover with an external scan that we have seen lead to things like ransomware attacks or data exfiltration. There actually is an organization out there called MITRE, spelled MITRE, and they maintain a list of the tens of thousands of known software vulnerabilities. I think the list is like 85 or 90,000 vulnerabilities long now. It's an enormous number. But the good news for us is that threat actors don't use that whole list. They use a couple of dozen typically to launch the attacks that we see. So we want to focus your IT team's effort on just identifying the vulnerabilities that are most likely to cause a ransomware attack or a cybersecurity incident here. So after you enter in your digital property schedule, we're going to scan for just 53 vulnerabilities, because that's about the number that we've seen lead to the attacks that we've worked over the past 3 or 4 years. So if we identify one of those vulnerabilities on any of the systems that you have identified, we're going to let you know what vulnerability we saw. If you hit view details, we're going to let you know the date that we found it, and we're going to let you know the exact system that we found it on. And what that allows your IT team to do is direct their remediation efforts at that exact computer that has that vulnerability. So once they know where it is and what it is, it's pretty easy for them to then follow a series of steps to get it remediated from there. So once they've actually done the remediation, they can run the scan again, and they can confirm that it's in fact been remediated. If it's a type of vulnerability that maybe requires a little bit more lift to get it actually remediated, and some of them do, there's some vulnerabilities that might take 30 to 40 hours to actually remediate. If it's one of those and the IT team says, hey, you know what, I just don't have the time to do this, I just need to contract out and have somebody do that, that's something that we can help with. So they would just hit the get help button, and they can just submit the request there, and they can send that to us, and we can help your firm take care of that. And we've got some preferred pricing arrangements in place with Houseman to make sure that you're getting the best value out of that. But that's just if your IT team doesn't have the bandwidth to do it themselves. So it's important to note with this Jumpstart Threat Scanner that once you've initiated your first scan, you have full access to this portion of the tool for 30 days. After 30 days, if you want to continue scanning, you hit this upgrade button right here, and then it's $250 annually to continue scanning. So that's a cost that Houseman Group has negotiated about a 75% discount off of list price for that. So I just want to reiterate, that's annually, that's not per month or per week or per scan or anything like that. So you just hit that proceed to payment button, and you would get it taken care of through a little e-commerce platform that would pop up, but pretty intuitive from there. And then the scans run on a weekly basis, and then you can run them on demand if you want to do it more frequently too. So the last piece that I'll show you here is this third module for the Jumpstart guides. Again, this goes back to the idea that sometimes an IT professional just needs a little bit of guidance to get out the gate on a certain project. So if you get a quote back from a carrier and it's got a subjectivity that you need to be doing vulnerability scanning, phishing simulations, and get better email protections, you can click on, say, this email protections project guide, get an understanding of what this control is, learn a little bit about how this control actually can get implemented. And then there's one of two things you can do. You can either hit this get in touch button if you need some help and you need to be connected with a local managed service provider or somebody local to you to get that tool in place. You can do that. You can send us a request and we'll get that hook. We'll get you connected there. When you hit send, that email goes to either me or Lauren. So it's our two smiling faces that'll help you out with that. So if you need help and you need to get connected to somebody, we can facilitate that. Or if you've got this and you've already got the control in place, you can document proof of performance right within the platform as well. The date that you implemented it, you can describe your implementation, and you can also upload supporting documents like maybe a paid invoice that shows it's done, so that when you get to your insurance renewal time, you've got everything you need to prove your insurability right within the platform here as well. So the last thing that I'll show you about the platform here, so if you've clicked the link in the chat and you've gone through and you've created your organization, what you're going to want to do is hit this users button and hit add user, and you're going to want to add others within the company that are going to be relevant to your company's cybersecurity journey. So if there's other executives on your team that you want included, you certainly want to include your IT professional, whether that's internal or external. If you just add their first name, last name, email address, and then their user permission level, I'd recommend super admin for, say, somebody in IT. Once you hit save, it will send an email notification off to them saying, hey, you've been added as a user in ABC Concrete's version or instance of Cyber Jumpstart. They'll create their own username and password. And what that allows is everybody on your team to be singing off the same songbook. The last thing we'd want is IT to have their own version where they're creating an incident response plan here, and the controller is over here creating their own version. Like that, we want everybody on the same version, because that's how we coordinate security, frankly. So that is the platform in a nutshell. If you've got any questions on that, drop them in the Q&A. We'll address those at the end here. But in that sense, we'll just keep things moving. We're going to wrap up shortly here, and we'll get you back to your day. So there we go.
As David mentioned, it's time for our Q&A. So I know David went over everything extremely thoroughly, but I'm sure there are some questions you might have, industry-specific ones. You are welcome to send those in right now in the chat or Q&A feature. I'm surprised Alex Bauer isn't going to try and test your knowledge. He's on the Zoom right now.
I'm waiting. I'm ready.
All right, no questions. Bauer says, no, I'm good. That is good to hear. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you found this information really useful to you. We'd love to hear your feedback in the form of a survey once this webinar ends. There's just a couple of questions we're hoping you can fill out for us to let us know what you thought of it, and any new webinar topics you're thinking of. Speaking of Alex Bauer, he is actually presenting on the hard market on June 15th. So we have another webinar coming up if that interests you. You can follow us on LinkedIn to find out more about that, as well as other webinars and events. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, take care.